We're at the law office of Sean Kendall. We specialize in VA disability benefits appeals. I'm here with Sean Kendall, and I'm Megan Kondrachuck. I'm an associate attorney here, and we're going to go through the new Honoring Our PACT Act that just passed, or that was just signed by the president into law. We've gotten a lot of questions about this act, so we're really just going to hit the high points today and try to give you a general idea of what to expect and what this means for veterans. So with that, we'll just jump right into it. So the act is going to be dealing largely with burn pits and airborne toxins. So it is pretty specific to Gulf War veterans, but there are some provisions in the act that deal with veterans from other conflicts and other time periods. But there are a lot of new burn pit conditions, and that's really what the news has been focusing on. So we're going to talk about that here. So there's been 23 respiratory illnesses and cancers added to the burn pit list. And we do have a list of those here. One that is not included on this list, I noticed, was asthma. So asthma is now going to be what we call a presumptive condition. And Sean, do you want to just briefly explain what a presumptive condition is for people who don't know what that is?
So the presumptive conditions are disabilities that are on the list of Gulf War illnesses, mainly from a previous law that was passed, and then the VA came up with some regulations. So as long as you have service in the Gulf and are diagnosed, I think by 2024, the VA keeps moving that date back, the disability is service connected. So for asthma, sinusitis, and rhinitis were added by the VA, I think in February of 2022. And then these new disabilities are also going to be assumed related to service. Is that your understanding, that these will all be presumptive conditions?
Yes, absolutely. And that's something that's important to note, is that you do need to have a diagnosis for one of these things. So, you can have presumptive service connection for asthma, but if you have never received a diagnosis for asthma, you're going to want to start developing that evidence if you suspect you have asthma, so that you can file a claim for one of these conditions.
Right, and so these first A through K listed disabilities are all cancer. What does the next slide show?
Yeah, so that would be the rest of the conditions that are going to be probably more common. So chronic sinusitis, rhinitis, bronchitis, those are ones that we see a lot from burn pit exposure. And that, there's previously been some difficulty in getting service connected. I think there was also a time limitation on when you could be diagnosed for those conditions. I think it had to be within 10 years under the last provision that they passed for sinusitis, rhinitis, and asthma. But I believe, and I could be incorrect about but I believe that this bill actually gets rid of that 10-year limitation.
Right, but it doesn't include asthma. So if asthma has the 10-year limitation, that's going to be an issue. That's also different from other Gulf War presumptive disabilities like IBS, which the diagnosis just had to happen by the end date in the regulation. So there is going to be a difference between these new disabilities and, well, at least the new disabilities of asthma and sinusitis. Again, whether those get removed, because I do see sinusitis and rhinitis are in the law. So the date of the diagnosis is going to be an issue. The other thing, I think, with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and chronic bronchitis and emphysema is whether if a veteran is a smoker or not, whether the VA is going to try and blame the smoking as the cause versus exposure to burn pits. And so that's going to be an issue that comes up.
Right, because these conditions are presumptive, but the VA can overcome that presumption by proving that something else has caused your disability.
Okay.
And as far as, this is great news for people who want to file new claims under the PACT Act, as far as veterans who have currently pending appeals for claims that were filed before the PACT Act went into effect. What does this mean for them in terms of service connection, and will they get an effective date back to the original date of their claim?
Well, the claim's going to get granted, but the effective date is going to depend on whether other evidence shows it should be service connected. We can actually try and use the PACT Act itself and the scientific studies to support that, to show an earlier effective date. or other medical evidence like a doctor's opinion can also support an earlier effective date. I think one of the issues that's going to come up is veterans that have previously been denied service connection for these disabilities and did not appeal, and the case is ongoing, whether they're going to be able to go back to that original date. The law generally provides it's the date of the new law, and so that's going to be a problem if you're getting service connected for kidney cancer now, but have previously been denied, that you're not going to get the original effective date. For rhinitis and other things that have been ongoing for a number of months, rhinitis, sinusitis, asthma, it should be the date that the regulations were changed back in February.
Okay. Yeah, so I think people have gotten really excited about this bill, and it's certainly great news for veterans, but there's definitely still going to be some struggles with the VA as far as effective dates and even service connection if there's other things in play, like you mentioned, smoking, for some of these respiratory issues. So anything else to add on the burn pit issue?
No, I don't think so. No.
All right. So just a brief note on healthcare. We don't necessarily specialize in healthcare benefits. We work more with the disability benefit side of things, but Gulf War veterans should know that they are now put into priority group 6 for healthcare, even if they don't have service-connected conditions with the VA. And then just moving on to some other high points from the PACT Act. You can see those here. They are providing an extension of combat eligibility for health care from 5 to 10 years with an open enrollment period for veterans who missed their window. The Act demands that VA streamline the VA's review process for establishing toxic exposure presumptions. It concedes exposure to airborne hazards and burn pits based on location and dates of service, and that would be the Southwest Asia area. So there's going to be specific countries on that list. So if you visited any of those countries within the time frame, the VA is going to concede exposure to airborne hazards and burn pits. The Act requires medical exams and opinions for certain veterans with toxic exposure disability claims. And then moving away from burn pits, it does actually address some Agent Orange exposure issues. So the Act adds hypertension and monoclonal gammopathy of undetermined significance to the list of presumptions for Agent Orange exposure, if you can show that you were in one of the presumptive areas for Agent Orange.
Yeah, that's going to be a pretty significant part of the law, is adding hypertension. It's a very large population of veterans that served in Vietnam with this diagnosis. Hypertension is usually not rated very highly. I think 10 to 30% is what we usually see, but it can cause a lot of secondary problems, as people know, and require medication. I think one of the big issues is that it's going to be a lot of delay added in deciding these cases, because there is going to be a lot of people who served in Vietnam who are claiming hypertension. I think the other thing that we need to think is people who have died of complications of hypertension and widows of Vietnam veterans are going to be able to apply for benefits too. And so I think that widow population is a lot of spouses that have not really thought about filing the claim. So that is something that's going to be an issue as well. And then the other issue for Vietnam veterans is that there has been a lawsuit, the Niemer lawsuit, which might provide for retroactive benefits under this law for hypertension issues, especially if it's been applied for and denied in the past.
Great. Yeah, so the same as with the burn pit claims, there is some uncertainty around the effective dates for these things. So that's certainly something that if you're doing this on your own and you don't get the effective date that you'd like, that is where we could potentially step in and help with some of these more complicated effective date issues. Mm-hmm. So moving on to just some other high points, the PACT Act creates a presumption of exposure to radiation for certain veterans who participated in radiation cleanup activities. It allows for a new tort claim for veterans and families exposed to toxic water at Camp Lejeune. So that would be separate from a VA disability benefits claim, to actually be a tort claim for disabilities incurred due to that toxic water.
Yeah, that's going to be really complicated. So veterans, you've already seen tons of advertising about the tort claim law. No one's actually filed a lawsuit. There's no actual benefits available. And so the tort claim is going to be against the United States, and the United States has not conceded liability here. And so there has to be a fairly high standard of proof in order to prove that water has caused disabilities. And I could see that this could be a long and ongoing lawsuit. We don't know if the United States will settle against this. So there's a lot of advertising where lawyers and large law firms are trying to sign people up, but no one's actually filed a lawsuit. So you might want to think about contacting an attorney and being asking a lot of extra questions before actually signing something up, because there's no lawsuit has been filed against the United States for the Camp Lejeune poisoning yet.
Great. And then another big area is going to be that the bill expands Agent Orange exposure to veterans who served in Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. So we have a lot of Thailand veterans who are now going to get presumptive exposure to Agent Orange, but we still potentially have some effective date issues there for how far back that goes.
So for Thailand veterans especially, a lot of Air Force veterans who served on the air bases there are now presumed to be exposed to Agent Orange. And under the old cases, you actually had to present evidence of exposure, and there was a lot of VA has conceded that the government documents show exposure to Agent Orange along the perimeter of these air bases. So now this is presumed to have been anyone who served in Thailand to have been exposed to Agent Orange. It shouldn't affect effective date. It should be the date of the claim, not the date of this law. In other cases, the courts have held that the presumptions that show the change in the law that shows that there's some kind of procedural change that shows the presumption of exposure. In another context of Agent Orange, they said that that is not a liberalizing law, that is just a change in procedures. That should be the same here. The presumption of exposure should not be considered a liberalizing law, but just a change in the standard. And so Thailand veterans that currently have claims pending who are now granted because of this change should get their original effective date. But I do expect VA to fight that. And so that is in a situation where veterans who served in Thailand are going to need to get an attorney to get that effective date of when they first filed their claim.
Right. Definitely with some of these changes in law, the VA will eventually hopefully have more comprehensive policies, but we find when these things first roll out, there's a lot of inconsistency, especially between various VA entities and offices on how these things are applied. So that's definitely something to look out for. Next, the PACT Act will improve data collection between the VA and the Department of Defense, or that is what the PACT Act has said that the government must do, and commission studies related to incidents of cancer among veterans, health trends of post 9/11 veterans, and feasibility of providing health care to dependents of veterans. So a lot of this is research that the VA has been ordered to undertake, and now it just has to be put into practice, which is obviously going to take some time. And then the PACT Act requires the VA to provide standardized training to improve toxic exposure disability claims adjudications. So hopefully we will see some more consistency in how these things are decided between VA offices. And then the PACT Act requires the VA to conduct outreach and provide resources to toxic exposed veterans. And optimistically, I have already seen some veterans getting emails about being able to file claims under the PACT Act. So that happened, I think, before the president even signs the bill. So it does seem like the VA is trying to be proactive on this. But definitely, if you don't feel like you got the information that you needed from the VA, that's where we would encourage you to consult with an attorney.
Yes, contact us about any of the questions about this act or your entitlement to benefits, and we'll try and provide an answer.
Awesome. Well, I think that is all for just our highlights of the PACT Act. But if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can contact us through our website or by phone at 303-449-4773, and we'll be happy to have someone talk with you.